Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly politics show with myself, Councillor Premier, and co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in today's show, we got an interesting lineup. First thing is the Inequality Commission report has come out. So the Inequality Commission is a commission commissioned by Tower Hamlets Council under the auspices of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. And they published a report after getting evidence. So we're going to listen to a person, a guest who actually took part and get their views on the report. Then after that, we're going to talk about livable streets, the drama around it, the calling that was going to happen or didn't happen, and the discussions around it and what's happening next. I know we've got a tribunal due in the Bethnal Green area, which is really topical given the activities on social media. And then we're going to talk about the development, the plan, the London plan has come out, or the master plan for Tower Hamlets has come out, and heads have been turned about the amount of development we're going to have. So just to give you an idea, it's projected that the E14 postcode area is going to have 250,000 in residents in Tower Hamlets. So just to give you the understanding of the scale of development and growth in Tower Hamlets. So join us after the break where we kick off with the Inequality Commission. Is it just a tick box exercise or radical step? Join us after the break. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekly politics show. Myself, Councillor Premier, and co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this segment, we're going to talk about Tower Hamlets Council's Inequality Commission and the report that's been put out by the Inequality Commission. So the Inequality Commission was a commission that was set up on the back of Black Lives Matter movement. The political leadership in the council wanted to do something about it, look at structural discrimination that residents face in terms of how they interact with the council and other public services. They've published a report a few days ago, and we're joined by a guest who's not going to give his true name because he's working and doesn't want to have consequences, but someone who took part in the commission, and it's Abdul. Abdul, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, Abdul, we can hear you. Thanks for coming on the show. I know it is tough, so like, especially in the kind of job that you're involved in, so like speaking out. But Abdul, do you just want to go through how you come across the Inequality Commission and how you felt when you saw that it was set up and what it was going to do, and your colleagues and other people that took part in the commission who gave evidence to it?
I came across it probably late 2020, and I thought, oh, this is quite a positive step for the council to sort of lead on and sort of look at what is happening within the borough, especially a diverse borough as ours. And obviously, there's a clear difference between the power that people that hold power position, and obviously the people at the bottom who are your general sweepers, cleaners, and so on. I was quite excited. I spoke to my colleagues and friends. I thought, let's get involved because hopefully, if we put our voices forward, there'll be some change. And if I'm honest with you, probably it was a 50-50 split where people thought, do we really want to get involved? It's just going to be another report where it gets whitewashed, or it sort of like just paints over the cracks, really, and then that's it. Nothing gets done. But I managed to convince a few people, and we got on board, and we sort of gave our evidence in terms of our lived experiences, what it feels like to be in the borough. I've been in the borough for a very, very long time, and I've seen the difference from education to physical activity to health and well-being, all of those things in terms of how it's come across from 80s to 90s and so on. And as I said to you, I wanted to get involved because I was a victim of such, should I say, structures of racism. I would probably strongly say there are institutional racism, and these things happen covertly. They don't happen overtly because obviously there'll be an outcry. They happen covertly, and they happen within the positions of power. If you look at a lot of the positions in whatever industry you look at, they're mostly held by white people. And people who are educated, qualified, like myself, qualified to do a professional job, highly influential job within the borough, we get overlooked. I'll give you an example. The two examples, really. One was I went for a job. The questions, and these are all factual, by the way, and I'm more than happy to contest it if need be. Questions for the interview was given to my counterpart, and obviously they got the job. And then going for a position higher up, I was excluded from a higher position job because I don't know, but they say that I didn't have the right qualification, right experience, even though I was the only one qualified for that position. So these are the types of racism we, and myself and other colleagues, brought to the table to the commission to say, look, there's enough of us here saying the same thing. We need you to start looking at why this is happening, what can be done, and how we can challenge this, because at the end of the day, we need not just ourselves, but the future generation of the borough, and not just future generation of our borough, but borough people outside the borough, nationally and probably regionally, to probably look at us and say, we're making a difference, we're making that change. And if you look at the laws, Equality, I think, Act came in 2010. That's great. We're in 2020, and now we're doing an equality report. I think it should have been done probably 2-3 years into, or 2 or 3 after the Equality Act came out, so that way we can start looking at ourselves and go forward. But if I read the report, or I've read the report, and if I'm honest with you, it did highlight a few things I was hoping, like structural racism, obviously racism within certain industries and so on, and also the impact it has on people, not just the young people, but also the older generation, in terms of how they're not being progressed into positions where they can make a decision which they understand better than probably other people do, especially people from white backgrounds. So if you're making a decision for brown people, you need that brown viewpoint, and at the moment we don't really have that. And that's what's sort of lacking in this report. It doesn't go far enough. But what I'll say is, when you look at the recommendations, are they good enough? And having the discussion between the people who took part, they don't agree it goes far enough. First of all, there's no measurable outcomes that you want, maybe in the first year or in the third year or the fifth year. What are they? What are the mechanisms to make sure these are met? These targets are met? And thirdly, who's going to be accountable? Like yesterday, I saw the launch and I saw loads of social media posts about, oh, well done, everybody. Everybody sort of seemed to be high-fiving and congratulating each other. But what have we achieved? We're just highlighting the same issues we've had through the disparity report, through other reports that's come about. Even if you go back to the Macpherson report back in 2000, and the review report back in 2008, change has happened, but at a very slow rate. But we still get these barriers where people from my background and other background, BME background, are not getting those positions, are being overlooked. There's a big sense of cronyism. People are getting jobs because their friends are there, or I know that person, and that person is getting the job because that relationship we have with each other. And the quality of people who have come through the education system with degrees, experiences, wealth of knowledge that they bring from their own community into the community is lost. And I'll give you one of the quotes from the disparity report. 17.5 billion pounds is being lost from the economy because people of BAME background have been completely ignored or overlooked and so on. And this is not me saying this. This is a report commissioned by Theresa May in 2017. So why did it take someone who died in America for us to be looking at ourselves, looking at what these things? Why wasn't this done a lot earlier? We have one of the biggest BAME counsellor groups in the country, and still we're not developing policies or implementing policies where the council itself, institution of education, or the NHS, no one's been held accountable. So what I would like to see, if I'm honest with you, going forward, I would like to take I would like the commissioners and the commission lead to look at the action plan and come up with measurable outcomes or targets that can be reached. And if we can make it quick, fantastic. All right, it's a win-win situation. But what we don't want, and this is not just me saying this, this is our group which took part, this to be a tick box exercise. And if I'm honest with you, totally honest with you, the first initial response we've had is it does look like that, because there are the actions and accountability missing from this key document. And I hope I'm wrong. In 3 years' time, we don't look back and say, oh, it's just another report we put on the shelf and highlight the same issues we've done for the last 20 years.
Okay, so just to give the viewers an understanding, the sector that you work in is education. Is that correct?
Yes, it is education.
You don't have to be specific, and that's in Tower Hamlets.
Yes, it is in Tower Hamlets. Yeah.
And the people who gave evidence with you worked in the education sector.
Yes, they did. Do you know what? It was a range of people, from senior leadership team to people who are in middle level experience. And if I'm honest with you, the wealth of experience covered over, I think, 150 years. If we all sort of put our years of experience together. And every single one of them believed that people with the right experience, the right knowledge, were being overlooked. And if I'm honest with you, if I compared myself to a white counterpart, that white counterpart every time was fast-tracked into those roles. We never understood why that was, but these are the things that we sort of like accepted. But I'll tell you something, there's a lot of fear out in the community in terms of like, if we complain, if we make a bit of noise about it, it's our job on the line. And that's when people get victimized, bullied and so on, and then people end up leaving the profession. And this is the biggest fear. And I just don't think it's sort of limited to our profession. There's other positions where you make a bit of noise, you're classed as a troublemaker. You're someone who's causing trouble. But all you want is equality, where you get the same privileges as a person of white background. And I'll give you an example. This has happened many times in my institution, where people have been fast-tracked straight away because they fit into that mold of what they're looking for, rather than thinking what is the right person for that role and who would have the biggest impact within that community. So that's my point of view.
Andrew, do you want to come into this before we go to a break?
So actually I'll start with a question and I'll talk about the process later. So I sit on a number of appointment panels. So basically councillors and the mayor are involved in sort of the process of basically picking sort of the next group of sort of leaders or sort of interview panels. So we have people applying for jobs at a senior level, and I'm on the panel of people that review the CVs that we get and then basically then do the interview at the end. And one of the things that's really struck me over the years, even though we are very keen to recruit people of BME origin, and in fact, the latest appointment panel I was on ended up actually picking somebody originally from Africa, actually into an educational role. But one of the things that's really struck me over the years is how rare it is to get any existing Tower Hamlets Council or partner organisation employees applying for these jobs. I can think of only 2 occasions in 7 years where I've sat an interview panel where there's been at least one person who's actually applied for one of the senior jobs that's going. And do you have an answer as to why so few people are applying or getting through? Or is it just people aren't applying because they don't feel confident in the process, or they just don't feel encouraged to apply?
Well, it's a mixture of various things, really, because I'll be honest with you, when I applied for a senior role, I was thinking, I'm just going to apply, see what happens. And true to word, it happened. I was the only one excluded from the whole process, and I was the only person of color from the whole process. So these are the things that people see, and people think, what is the point? Why am I going to put myself through all that hassle and then be rejected? Because we know, I could tell you before the interview who was going to get the job, because that's how obvious it was. And within the education system, this is how obvious it is. When people get appointed, it's people who they know, it's people who they prep behind the scene. Like the whole process of interview and so on, it's all about transparency and showing that we are going through the processes and due diligence and all of that stuff. But what you don't know is what happens behind the scenes. And there's a whole network of things that are happening. People are prepping themselves through people they know within the committee. I'm not saying you do this, Andrew, but it happens all the time. There's networks of people behind the scenes on WhatsApp group. They sort of push people forward, and those are the people who end up getting the job. And people are not confident in applying because they've lost confidence in the system. And this is exactly why people don't put themselves forward. Otherwise, we have a whole pool of talent in this borough. If we have a big group of people in this borough, are you telling me that there's people in this borough who are not good enough? If we're good enough to be doctors, if we're good enough to be solicitors, or good enough to be a lead within the NHS system, then we're good enough to do anything else. But the problem is the system is currently not letting us down. And this is where the conscious bias, the structural racism comes in. And this is at the highest level. And hopefully one day I can speak about this more openly than I am now. This is what happens at the highest level. The decision makers are the ones who, most of the time that I've seen, pre-select the ones that they want for the job. And we are just pawns in a system where we're sort of like, oh, fantastic, we've got a couple of people who are from the BME. We show that we are encouraging those people to sort of take part. And when you don't get the job, the classic example is, oh, you need a bit more experience. Oh, you need to get more qualified. What do you say to a person who's already qualified, who already got the experience for that job, but then is refused an interview? You can't really say anything. So these are the things that we in my industry have faced, and I know for a fact in the NHS it's happened the same, because I'm in contact with someone who's a national lead for cardiology, and he's from a BAME background, and he said exactly the same thing. We put ourselves forward unless we know those people, unless we run in the same circles as those people. We're never going to get a look in. We're just someone who applies. Okay, fine. Thank you for applying. Better luck next time. And that's it.
Okay, so we're going to go to a break. After the break, I'll let Andrew come in with another question to Abdul. So we're just going to go to a break. Break. So we're back. Welcome after the break. This is the Politics Show with myself, Councillor Premier, with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So we started off the show with speaking to Abdul, who took part in the Inequality Commission set up by Tower Hamlets Council on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement. Abdul, just that's his name that we're going to use in the program, because he works in Tower Hamlets in one of the education sector, and so he's just doesn't want to jeopardize his job, actually. So Andrew, I cut you off. Abdul's answered the first question. You had another follow-up question to him.
Yeah, so I've been reading the report as well, and I haven't finished yet, but the first bit I went to was kind of the recommendations, and there are a lot of them, which I think is actually a fault in the report. There's too many to track. But what would your sort of main recommendations be, either from what's already in that document, or what do you think's missing from that document in terms of recommendations?
I think one of the things that we need to sort of formalize is, first of all, as I said before, where's the data to back up some of this stuff? Like, where are we with the data? How many numbers of people who hold positions of authority, both in public sector or in the private sector? From that, you have a base where you can look at targets that you can set, aspirational target and obviously realistic targets. It's no good saying, oh, we need to put more people in forms of training and education. That's great, but at the end of the day, what if you get one person who's come into the training program? Fine, but in terms of like going on to become a leader or becoming a role model within an industry where people can actually, well, these guys can make those decisions for the community that they come from, it's missing. Then these are the gaps that need to be sort of put in. And also, how is this going to be accountable to anybody? At the moment, obviously, Asma is the commission lead. She might not be in a position next year in terms of going forward, not being a councillor or being deputy mayor. Who's going to take that on? Who's going to be held accountable within the council? Is it going to be Will Tuckley, or is it going to be someone else? We don't know that. And also the mechanism. One of the biggest things that we have in a community like ours is fear. Fear to come out and speak freely and say, I have been a victim. And because I've been a victim, I'm going to report it. There should be a reporting system where people can anonymously say stuff, and then there's action from it. And there's nothing in substance to say. I know we've got a whistleblowing policy, but I don't think many people know about that, if I'm honest with you. There's going to be a handful of people who actually know about these whistleblowing policies that the council can actually take on and actually do something about it. So it needs a bit more thought in terms of how we sort of hold the report to account, and also individuals to account. And I think obviously my answers are not the exact answers. There's going to be other people that the council need to go back to, the commission need to go back to, and say, all right, what can we do? How do we get you an experienced person, a person of responsibility in a position of authority to make decisions to benefit that community that you're standing in? So, and also make visibility of these people more prominent within the community, because at the moment, if there aren't many people who are in positions of authority, we don't really see them much. And as Kamala Harris said many months ago, you can't be what you can't see, and this is the problem we have.
Cool.
No, I think it's very interesting what you said about sort of targets, because one of the things I like to do with council documents is to see how often some words appear or don't appear. And it's very interesting, actually, the word target appears 48 times in the 54 pages, but I can't see any actual targets. It just says the word target without any actual targets, which means therefore it's very difficult to track the performance. And I came back to what I was saying earlier about the appointments process. You know, it's not a terrible process, because one of the things we're very keen on as councillors is sometimes, you know, we'll see a CV of somebody who is a long shot, you know, who doesn't have the right experience, but maybe has something interesting in their background that we want to try. And I remember a recent interview panel, there was a really fantastic candidate. Unfortunately, he didn't have the right experience for that job, but the feedback to him was, you know, we want to see you in a job somewhere in Tower Hamlets. So it's interesting, at our level, we are willing to take risks, but what's coming through the system is generally people who are not from Tower Hamlets. And most of in fact, nearly every senior officer in Tower Hamlets Council is not from Tower Hamlets, which I find shocking.
I want to come in on this. So I actually, after reading the report, because I work in the civil service, I actually looked at what Whitehall has in place, and it's a day-night difference in the sense that following the Equalities Act in 2010, Whitehall had policies in place in 2014. So they actually, we actually got targets in the civil service where they actually break down the different grades of officers within, and what is the demographic breakdown, and there's targets set within the service. These grades need to be much more representative. And so they set these targets, and then they have something called positive action groups that's underrepresented who have protective characteristics. So it could be gender, it could be age, it could be disability as well. And what they do, they set up training pathways to encourage officers at a lower grade to go through these training pathways to apply for much more senior positions. But I haven't come across anything like that in Tower Hamlets Council, and that's set up in 2014 under a Conservative government. So it's a Conservative government, and even recently, we all had to do training, etc. All the service had to do training in the following on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was directed from the minister. Everybody has to do the training. We have to give feedback, and there's this target set at each levels. Kind of, it's like, what are we going to do to basically make the service much more represented? But I find those kind of discussions lacking in Tower Hamlets Council, which is kind of surprising. It just seems like we're so behind the curve on this.
We are.
And it's not like it's actual legal obligations that we have. So the public sector equality duty, one of them is that you have to basically tackle any underrepresentation of protective characteristics through your policies, and then positive action is actually in the Equalities Act under section 158 and 159, where they actually set out what it actually means, which is basically provide training and encouragement. It's not, you're not setting quotas, you still assess the applications on a merit-based system, but what you're doing is you're admitting as an employer that because of societal structures, certain groups are disadvantaged. So what you're going to do is you're going to try to mitigate those disadvantages so everybody has an equal shot at those jobs, etc. So there is, and recently they said that we want 100 officers at a senior level from a BME background. So they actually got a target that they're going to measure in. And then they have senior officers who are in charge of each aspect of the target. So we know which officer, divisional director is in charge of that, and the reporting structure as well. And each of them have bullet point targets, like phase 1, we're going to do this, and that. So it's very well thought out, like a proper plan. But it seems nothing like that exists in Tower Hamlets or has been produced off the back of that. Andrew, do you want to come on those reflection?
Yeah, so I was going to ask sort of Abdul a final question. So the next stage of this, it goes to Cabinet on Wednesday, and in Cabinet will basically agree it. And in the Cabinet report, it basically says, in terms of what's happening next, is comment on how the Council can play a leadership role in taking forward the recommendations, including changes in policy within the Council. So it's basically for Cabinet to discuss on Wednesday how they take this forward. But how do you think we should be continuing this process going forward as councillors and as residents of Tower Hamlets?
I think we need to have a wider discussion in terms of the outcomes from the recommendations, and put it out there to see, okay, are you happy with the recommendation? Because at the end of the day, the councillors can agree to this or disagree with this, but if it's not fit for purpose in terms of who it's going to be impacting, then it's a paper which is worthless, really. You might as not use it. So I think there needs to be further consultation in terms of, from the recommendations made, how can that be implemented? What do we need more to make sure that there is accountability in terms of meeting certain targets, and people will feel that they can step up, they can do the training if they need to, or get the experience they need to become the next leader or become the next role model. Because at the end of the day, there's a whole generation behind us that need to see that change. Because when you look back from the racist times that our parents grew up in Brick Lane and so on, fighting all those changes, what has really changed? The only thing that's changed is gone behind closed doors. It's behind the camera rather than in front of it. And this is what the Cabinet needs to decide. Do we agree, because this is what we've come up with, or do we agree in consultation with the people who took part or other people? And there needs to be a further consultation process that needs to happen. And I agree with you what you say, Puru, about the stages within government and civil service that they put these things in place. When you reflect back on what you said, at each point there's accountability of numbers or people or the stage who's responsible for delivering certain things. with this document, you couldn't clearly identify who's actually going to be delivering things, what policy is going to be coming in, and how is it going to be implemented, monitored, evaluated, and so on. It's great if the council pass it, which is good, but the next stage is the difficult stuff in terms of how do we measure that success. And until we do that in consultation with the people of the community, then I don't think we're going to see any real outcome. It's just, as I said, it's just going to be another document that we can put on the shelf to collect dust.
Cool. Any final thoughts, Andrew? Anything you want to say, or Abdul, before we go to a break? Abdul, do you want to say anything else before we go to a break? Any final?
Just thank you for having me on the show, and I'm not just a lone voice. I hope there's other voices who hear my voice and think, do you know what, I can really stand up. I can feel what Abdul is saying, and these are the barriers, the closed doors that we're facing until we change. And sorry, one thing I was going to mention, the council plays a pivotal role in this. They have the power to do so much, but they haven't done so. It's been very little in terms of coming in. As I go back to the number of Bangladeshi BAME councillors we have in the council, this should have been done years ago, because they would have felt all of those changes. It's become like a ceremonial position that these councillors are sitting in those positions and think, yeah, okay, we're making decisions, but there's no point making decisions if they don't affect the people that need to be affected by these policies. And obviously equality is a massive thing. And I hope these councillors take responsibility and their duty very seriously when it comes to this document, because it should be changing lives for the future, for the next couple of years, but also for the generations coming behind us.
Cool. Any final thoughts, Andrew, before we go to a break? Sorry, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I got family stuff in the background. Sure. So no, delivery is key. Like everything to do with the council, we have to deliver on this stuff.
Cool. So let's see what happened. Let's see what the cabinet says on this. But we're going to go to a break. I just want to say thanks, Abdul, for coming, and we might ask you to come back if there's any further developments. But we're going to go to a break. After the break, we're going to discuss livable streets, the call-in that happened or didn't happen, and what happens next. So join us after the break.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show with myself, Councillor Premier, and co-host Councillor Andrew Ridge. So in this section, we're going to talk about the livable streets drama, kind of ish, the ongoing drama. So before last week, we said we were going to do a call-in, and then we were all preparing for the call-in, and then we got an email saying for technical reasons we can't accept your call-in. Andrew, do you want to just update the listeners as to what happened with the call-in, because you were taking a lead on this? So what happened?
So last Tuesday we sort of wrote the first draft of a call-in and shared it pretty much immediately with Tower Hamlets Council so they could see what we were working on, and then we sort of made an update on Thursday morning, and then they sort of asked more questions. So in the end, we sort of ended up writing 11 pages worth of information and answering their questions. And then sort of late on Tuesday, we got the email that basically said the call-in was rejected, which really surprised me because we kind of raised 4 points and I kind of half expected to lose 2 of them, but we would still have the other 2. And I think part of the problem is, the sort of council officers who took the decision were very legalistic and kind of like looking at what was sort of technically agreed in the cabinet meeting last November, and not listening to actually what Mayor John Biggs actually said last November. So in effect, what happened was we had a bunch of decisions made, some last November, some March. And last November, to be fair to the mayor, he did say he wanted to listen again, and he was organising more consultation events. So we didn't think these decisions were completely final, but the council now in effect saying, yes, those decisions were final, even though the equality impact assessment was completely rewritten and various other things. So, and what was interesting, it was the first time that opposition councillors have been involved in a call-in since November 2017, which was quite a long time ago. And the first time we try and do one, it gets rejected, which doesn't look good. And what we were trying to do with the call-in was actually to improve it. It wasn't about, stopping it or reversing it. It was just saying, here it is, let's add some stuff to it to make it better. And then it was rejected. And it was just discussed last night at the overview and scrutiny meeting, because we actually did another call-in on another issue where actually the committee voted unanimously that we'd recommend to the mayor and to cabinet that they relook again at the closure of the daycare centres. And we did debate this, and I know other councillors on the overview scrutiny committee were also disappointed in the officer decision, because actually I think they would have been interested in having this discussion.
Okay, so but in the email that we got, they were talking about some kind of review, like a vague term, kind of. It's like, your points are valid, we will take them on board, but nothing concrete. Do you want to just explain what we received in return? It seemed like they kind of like accept our arguments, but not accept the arguments or proposals.
Yeah, so that bit was really unclear. So I think from a practical point of view, one of the things I'm going to do is do an official complaint, because one of the really concerning things for me is that there were 2 important pieces of information not included in any of the cabinet reports. And one of them was the response of the emergency services to livable streets. And very simply, they like livable streets, they like safer streets, as do we all, but they have real issues about how the roads are actually closed. And it's been really interesting, even in the last couple of days, there's been lots of videos and pictures circulating on social media of emergency vehicles being blocked or not being able to turn the way they want to by roadblocks. So I think this is a real live issue, and for me, it's the most important issue. The second issue is slightly less urgent, but it's very clear that these bus gates generate a lot of money. So Wapping Busgate in just over a year generated £1.4 million. So if that were to happen in the Bow Busgates, that means the Bow Busgates are income generating and will basically pay for the whole scheme in perhaps 3 or 4 years. And that was a very important point. But, that number wasn't included in any of the cabinet reports. Again, I only got that information from a freedom of information request, which actually somebody else did. So for me, there's a particular concern about really important information not being included in cabinet reports, and we only find out about it either because we or other people are doing FOIs. And that's what the complaint will be about. Well,
it is a live issue. I know we were sort of like tagged onto tweets, and it's very, someone was sharing pictures of police cars being stuck, etc. We've seen a picture of an ambulance stuck on Old Bethnal Green Road. That the sort of like iconic sort of like image of livable streets is that bit in front of the Minerva estate, and then you see this ambulance stuck, and it is heating up. It is causing a lot of issues. It just seems like we need to get it right, and it's not all the information is there. And the other aspect that I've picked up is sort of like ASB. So just looking at so Bethnal Green was the first place where they actually implemented livable streets on a sort of like wide scale. And the feedback I'm getting from residents, just looking at social media and just talking to people who live there, that they haven't thought out the ASB issue. So one is it's very difficult for police to get there. They've become areas for massive congregation, and the police had to use their dispersal powers quite frequently in those areas. So there's been a letter that was sent to the mayor of Hackney about female residents not feeling safe. I'm just giving the facts. So a lot of residents have written. I know I've received messages, and I know the Labour MP Rupert Hock made the same points as well, and that's to do with Ealing, where it's been implemented. So there seems like there's all these issues that are coming up, but it's just Tower Hamlets Council seems to be just pushing ahead, sort of ish. What's your take on it? Why are they so determined on this? I just don't get it, to be honest.
No, so what the call in was basically suggesting is, in terms of the emergency services, is the use of lockable gates. So we're not sort of saying don't close the roads. It's simply saying, rather than putting these big fixed planters in, is put in some kind of gate or mechanism that the fire brigade or somebody else can kind of unlock. It's also very clear from the emergency services responsible, they really like bus gates because they can just go straight through at speed. So, basically I think the advice from them is not to have livable streets, but when you close roads, either have lockable gates, which they can then open in emergency, or use bus gates more. And what we know from the bus gates in Wapping and also in Blackwall Way is they also generate a lot of money. Which means that these things, rather than costing £24 million, could be self-funding. And given that we've got lots of other calls on our money, I'm not sure that £24 million is the best way of spending that money, especially if one or two more bus gates could solve some of those emergency services issues and also then help pay for the whole programme. But you can still close roads as long as they have lockable gates.
Yeah. So we're continuing with our tribunal. So we did the Wapping bit. Now we're moving into Bethnal Green, where a lot of the discussion is. So Andrew, if I'm correct, it's going to be next Wednesday. Is it that we're going to have our tribunal, and you're going to push out the link, and we'll push out the link. What other things you're looking for? Because Bethnal Green seems to be where it all happened, or where they're fortunate or unfortunate, given your perspective on the debate, to be the residents who've had livable streets put onto them. What other things are you looking when listening to residents' concerns when we go there?
We're trying to find out what residents' experiences of these are, to basically try and improve the programme. And that's basically what the intention of this process is. It's not to stop livable streets, because actually we've been changing streets, for decades, but we need to do it in a way that listens to people and listens to their concerns. And in the Wapping one, we actually had an ambulance driver sort of speak. And that for me was quite powerful. And then reading the FOI and then seeing all of the social media about ambulances and not just getting stuck in the mud, but turning around or having to sort of go round really slowly on the pavement. So for me, I've learned a lot about ambulance operations in the last couple of weeks. And that's what the purpose of these sessions is to listen to residents, to find out how it's working, what the issues are, and what we can do to mitigate them.
So join us next Wednesday, residents in Bethnal Green, particularly Wednesday, 7 p.m. Book that date and time. Come along, tell us your experiences, and also what lessons can be learned and how these schemes could be improved. I don't think anyone is denying climate change or anyone's denying the problem with air pollution. I think what the issue is that it seems that the debate is not including all perspectives and all voices. It seems to be very exclusive, or sort of like I know what's best kind of approach, which is a bit bizarre, because I think people who live on those streets know what's good for those streets, because you actually have an everyday experience of being there. But that's with livable streets. But we're gonna go to a break. After the break, we're gonna talk about growing Tower Hamlets. So Tower Hamlets is gonna be expanding. Andrew did a post about Brooklyn and Manhattan, kind of with all these like models of skyscrapers. So join us after the break where we talk about the projected development in Tower Hamlets. So I just want to give you a image. The E14 postcode area is projected to have 250,000 residents. So just imagine that. So join us after the break where we will basically talk about the development, the 50,000 extra residential homes in Tower Hamlets or even more. So join us after the break. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show with myself, Councillor Premier, and co-host Councillor Andrew Ridd. So in this section, we're going to talk about growing Tower Hamlets. So the projected development or scale of development that's projected in Tower Hamlets. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew. I know, Andrew, you've done some social media posts with some pictures, which a lot of people are talking about. So do you want to talk about that and also the projected numbers that are expected?
Yeah, so if you look at my Twitter account, which is Andrew Wood 17, I've done two tweets, one called Manhattan and one called Brooklyn, because what the council have done is they're working on something called a tall building supplementary planning document. But basically, they're using a 3D model. And what the 3D model shows, like a computer-generated image of what Tower Hamlets will look like in the future. And they've put into that model all of the sites with planning permission under construction that they know are coming. And what they've done rather unusually is they've also added sites which are not yet in progress, where nobody's got any specific plans for, and have done it in the color pink, because they kind of know or expect at some point those are the sites they're going to get built on. And they want to have a feel for what the area would look like if all of those developments do come forward. But it's also part of a process of trying to set the height of buildings, and what the council are trying to do is do this, and the developers are trying to do this in terms of the height, and it's part of that debate. But what it does clearly show you is what Tower Hamlets will look like in the future, and obviously even more tall buildings on the Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf, but also in areas like Poplar and also along the Lee River and up to Stratford as well. And it is really striking, which is why I use the does this look like Manhattan or Brooklyn as a kind of example? And just to give you some numbers, so the population in 2011 was about 200, for the whole of Tower Hamlets was about 250,000 people. We're already in 2021 about the 330,000 people. And I remember a few years ago having a conversation with a very senior person in Poplar Harker, and we were trying to work out what the combined population of kind of the Poplar, Aberfeldy, Lansbury area was going to be, and then plus the Isle of Dogs. And we came to a population for the E14 postcode area of 250,000 people, which is the same number as the whole of Tower Hamlets Council was in 2015. And Tower Hamlets, of course, as well, because there are other growth areas, especially around Whitechapel and also on the city fringes as well. And we have targets. So the Mayor of London has basically issued a London plan recently. And he's basically said is that over the next 10 years, starting in 2019-20, is that we have to deliver 34,730 homes in those 10 years in Tower Hamlets as a whole. And then the council then issued a local plan last January. And that basically said over a slightly longer period of time, so over 15 years, is that the target is, well, depending on how you define it, is either 54,889 homes or 58,965 homes. So if you think that on average, we have 2 people living in each home on average, some more and some less, obviously, a target of 55,000 homes means 110,000 people in the next sort of 10 years from planned development. And the pictures kind of show where that development would be coming. And there are 2 more meetings next week for the Wapping and then the sort of the western part of the borough, which again I've advertised. So if you want to see what your area could look like, then I highly recommend trying to join one of those council organised meetings.
I've recently saw on the GLA have their own kind of data set as well, like the kind of planning development. I know Tom Copley, who's like the deputy mayor, tweeted it, which is interesting as well. So you could go there and have a look as well. So like London wide, so like how we fit in the picture. But it's gonna, this kind of scale of development is gonna have, although it's welcomed and will benefit in terms of infrastructure, in terms of council tax revenue as well. I know, so that was one of the arguments that was used at the call-in last night, saying that we don't have to make the same difficult decisions as other councils throughout the country because we're in a growth area, so our tax revenue is actually increasing. So we could take slightly longer to take some of the difficult decisions, sort of ish, and the way our population is built. So there are benefits to it, but also my concern is that if it's not managed properly, it could cause a lot of disruption as well, and we could see inequality kind of like increase in the borough. And there are arguments, inequality doesn't matter or inequality is good, but I do recommend there's a book called The Spirit Level, which actually talks about high levels of inequality actually has its own social issues within areas as well. And so but there's another book called Rebel Cities, which actually talks about these kind of issues of massive development in cities throughout the world and the kind of problems, social problems and political problems that they cause on the ground. So that have we, is there any discussion about how we manage it, or are we going to just have a laissez-faire approach in terms of the council?
So I'm probably not the best. The council will give you a completely different answer, but I feel sometimes it's very much a laissez-faire approach. We're very bad at delivering the infrastructure, and especially the social infrastructure to support this. But one of the really interesting questions for us, and obviously, this is all based on the assumption that London's growth continues, and that basically employment growth continues in London, and people will still do at least some work in an office. And obviously, that may completely change with COVID. We just don't know, and I think we'll find out this year. But if London's employment growth continues, and London has added about 1 million jobs in the last 10 years, if that were to continue, a lot of these new apartments will be filled by people from overseas, from other countries. And it's already very interesting to see in some of the new developments like London City Island, just how international the mix of people is in those developments. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens to people from Hong Kong now that they've been offered an easier path to living in the UK. Will we see a bigger, increasing Hong Kong population, given the fact that, the first Chinese community in the UK was in Limehouse about 160 years ago. So yeah, that's going to be very interesting to kind of see what, because if you think about Tower Hamlets, traditionally we've been the first home of immigrant communities, the Huguenots from France, and then the Jews from Eastern Europe, and then people from Bangladesh in the kind of 1970s onwards, and then more recently sort of Eastern Europeans. Will we see a fresh wave of immigrants, and will they come from all over the world, or will they come more from one particular area like some of the groups in the past? It's going to be very interesting to see how that happens over the next 10 years. And what these pictures show you is where those people will be moving to, which is mainly in the kind of south east of the borough and then the west of the borough.
I think the other thing is I think it'll have an impact on the politics and the discussion, in the sense that we need to be less parochial, in the sense that there's with this level of investment, with this level of people moving in, there's going to be more attention paid to what happens in Tower Hamlets, especially with the Chinese embassy being here. I could see like a different kind of dynamic to Tower Hamlets in the sense that we in effect we become a city within a city. Mm-hmm. So, and it has its own dynamics. And if the Chinese embassy moves in, especially with the kind of good facilities in the Canary Wharf, government departments are moving in. I could see other diplomatic missions moving in to Tower Hamlets, and that has an impact. But we need to have discussions as well in the council and locally as well, as to how we sort of like welcome that, and how we sort of like integrate that, and what can we do to have maximum benefits for residents. It could be that we encourage residents to learn languages. It could be, I know we've cut the language service, but reform it again with a different purpose of trade, etc., engaging with this level of investment. So these kind of discussions need to be had, which I don't think strategically we're having. It just seems to be we're prodding along, and then something's happened. We have to react to it. So we're nearly at the end of the show. Andrew, is apart from anything else interesting coming up in the cabinet next Wednesday, apart from the Inequality Commission?
There's a bunch of things sort of happening in cabinet. I'm just trying to remember what they all were. I think that the main one is the one we've just been talking about, which is sort of the BME Commission. There's a bunch of stuff about community buildings. The interesting one is the new intermediate housing policy. So basically, there's, if you want to sort of shared ownership, so if you want to buy 25% of a affordable property, right now, sort of anybody kind of in the UK can kind of bid for those properties. So I think what they're proposing next week is that there would be like a 3-month window, that the only people who could buy in the first 3 months of a shared ownership property going in the market would be people already living in Tower Hamlets. So that's kind of coming, and a bunch of other things. But in Tower Hamlets, there's always things happening which are interesting. So
no probs. Well, join us next week, guys. Thanks for listening. It's been a really interesting program, especially with Abdul coming in and just sharing his personal experience. Yeah. And it's something for me to think about, and for Andrew as well. We to take to the cabinet meeting. But thanks for listening to us, guys, and join us next week for the weekly politics show every Friday, 7 p.m. with myself, Councillor Premier, and co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. But thank you again, and join us next week. Thank you.